tall cedar timber railway. So I had visions of an outdoor railroad a long time ago. And those visions didn't get very far because the indoor railroad moved on. And so in 2019, as I was approaching retirement, I thought it's time to start the outdoor railroad again. So this was the corner of the ill-fated outdoor attempt. And what I had there was sort of a raised bed with cedar planks and soil on top of that. And eventually that failed. Imagine that. I also had plastic track out there that stayed out there for almost 20 years and worked out just fine. It didn't degrade. The only pieces that broke were the ones that I broke trying to take it up. So it's like, this stuff will work, so I'm going to keep going. But I wanted something a little more permanent and a little higher off the ground. So I started building on this. And what I did is I built just this large raised garden bed, filled it up with, put drainage in place. The two white pipes sticking up are for automatic sprinklers. And drainage goes out the bottom and out the back of the fence, and filled it up with a bunch of yards of gravel, a lot of digging, and eventually I got that. So that's ready for track. I let it set a year to settle. I didn't know how long it would take to settle. Turns out it didn't settle very much. Finished up the fence and got the track laid in, and there's what it looks like after the track is in place. And this picture was taken this last year, but this chunk of the railroad was ready to run in 2021. And it did some running. Finished the fence behind it. The name Tall Cedar came from the tall cedars behind it there. Those all grew from volunteers that a local neighbor gave me. They were about 3 foot tall when I got them 30 years ago. And they do a nice job of shading the layout on a warm day.
I sure do. Do you tamp the gravel or just let it sit?
I tamped it with a hand tamper as I went. Yeah, it was slow going, and then towards the end, I had to go up a ramp to get it up over the lip to dump it in, and finally with buckets. So it was a bit of a job, but able to get it done. So why my back hurts? Between this one and the other raised beds I've built, there's about 300 of those wall blocks. 20 tons plus or minus of dirt, rocks, gravel, stepping stones, wall blocks, and pressure treated lumber. Best I can figure. And the fun thing about all of this stuff is you don't just pick it up once. You know, you load it in your vehicle, you take it home, you unload it, you put it in place, you decide that's not quite the right place, and you move it around. So even the dirt and the gravel don't necessarily go where it should the first time. So got to a lot of exercise, so that's a good thing. About 100 feet from one end to the other in my backyard now. I have one 3-track yard right in the middle. I have 4 different logging areas where the logging train picks up cut logs, brings them to the mill. And I kept the grades pretty flat. I have one long grade that's about 1.5% and one short grade that's about 2%. 200 feet of track, so it's basically a loop all the way around, but you can't really pick that up. I was able to disguise that. 24 switches. It's amazing how many switches you can eat up in just a small layout. 2 engines, 18 log cars, and 16 assorted other freight cars. Most of my equipment is Bachmann, but anything that's within scale tolerances will work. Strange thing about outdoor railroading is that there's a lot of different scales, all using the same track gauge. The track gauge is the LGB 1 3/4. I'm working in 1 to 20.3 scale roughly, and the picture of the climax it was on before I started talking, that's a 1 to 20.3 model. As long as the flat car is about the same width, it really is hard to tell the scale on a flat car. The house cars you got to be a little more careful on. If they're too short, they don't look right. But basically, anything that I want for a logging railroad, I can pretty much find in the somewhat ready to run market, and then do some kit bashing if I need to. So we'll follow the line around the yard, and then we'll come back and show some operations on it. So here's the track plan. We're going to start over here at Rainier. We're going to work our way around to Skookumchuck, and Skookum Supply is there. And there's 2 tracks that run across, and there's a big storage shed here. You'll see it. And that comes to Gregory. There's the main yard. It has the mill, the yard, the log dump. A lot of action happens there. The switcher works out of Gregory. When you leave Gregory, you go by Camp 2. It's actually on a loop, one of my original loops. You go by Rock Camp. Not real creative on the names, but most of the logging railroads weren't very creative on the names. So guess what comes from Rock Camp? Camp 3, another place to pick up logs. Camp 4, another place to pick up logs. And a very well-known Northwest Washington name, Railroad Camp. That's another place to pick up logs, and it also has some offices and some things going on there. It's also got to show you about my motto. I don't know that I was the one that coined the Shady Run Railroad, but that seemed to have stuck this summer because it's in the shade, or it's not run very well. I'm not sure what people were saying when they told that to me. I also found another one that I liked even better within the loggers lexicon is be quick or be dead. So this is my backyard. This is an area that will be Rainier. It will get built next summer or next spring. So you come across over here on the side. I lost my. Over here is the existing railroad, the existing height that matches those raised beds I built. And I will build a connection across here that will lift out this portion of it so I can get to the rest of my yard. And just a loop a track here. Running battery like I'm running outside, you can run as many reverse loops as you want. You can do all kinds of things with reverse loops, like run around your train, create yard areas inside the reverse loop. So that's what this will be. It'll probably have a station right there, and the train will come out of here across the loop and join the rest of the layout. Here's another view of it when the weather was a little bit nicer, but you'll see how that's going to connect into the existing railroad. And again, roughly the same height within, a small fraction of a percentage of grade, maybe up or down here. I'm not real sure. This Skookum Loop, this was early on. Visiting some other railroads, I saw some very neat planters set up with the train running around the planters and giant rhododendrons. Well, I didn't have time to grow a giant rhododendron, so I dropped in the flower pot here, the whiskey barrel, and added the rhododendron. Gives it a little bit of something to go around. Just breaks up the scenery some. This is going to be a bridge of some sort at some point. Again, just to break up the view a little bit. This door is closed right now, but this will take us into the storage shed. When I was working on Skookum Loop, I decided to add Skookum siding so that there's some work to be done here. So there's a set out here for this building, and this track in the back is the track in the back is the one that will hook its way around to the new section called Rainier. There's a storage shed. I had one half of that storage shed with no doors on it when I originally started on this. I decided I needed a bigger storage shed, so before I got the railroad built, I built the second half of the storage shed, again with no doors on it. And then I decided that at some point I should put doors on it. And I found out that this thing isn't nearly as square as I thought it was. And putting doors with angles on it turned out to be quite the exercise. I was eventually able to get the doors on, and they're close enough that you can't tell by looking at them that they're not quite square and they're not exactly the same.
How many points did you get on your scratch build?
I got 0 for that, which is just wrong. The 2 tracks run across the back, so it's still storage for other things. And there's a 3rd track in there that also gives me a place to store some cars. And there's enough room for all the large plastic bins that I keep my railroad in when I'm not running it. That leads us into Gregory. That's this first area that I built. What I really built was 2 big reversing loops. One here and goes this way, and one here and goes that way. And that was the first part of the railroad. So everything meets right there at that point. It gets to be a hot spot. You can see I've used really tight curves. I can get away with that with a geared engine and logging equipment. So that works really well for me. And we'll talk a little bit about what more is in here as we move through the slides. There's another view. You can see this is the log dump area. That would be the brow log. When you're operating, you're standing in the pond, which would be right here, and also in the mill. And so the logs get dropped in the pond. The milled lumber comes out here onto this siding and eventually makes its way out to Rainier. You can also see a bridge section that takes us to the next part of the railroad. This bridge comes out during winter, made it on as light as I possibly could. There's two tracks across there. Basically, the rest of this is hollow, built out of pressure-treated plywood. There's that front view of Gregory, the mill there. There's a new siding this spring going in back here. There's a siding there and the log dump that we talked about. And there's the 3-track yard. And it turns out not a lot of extra track. It's a garden railroad, so you have to have some garden. I thought about putting in a tunnel. Anytime you put in a tunnel, you have to create access that you can get in from the top, and I didn't want to do that. So rather than that, I decided to put it together as a nice cut back here with rocks on the front and the back, and it provides the same visual break as you're running your trains around. These are dwarf Alberta spruce, a little bit heat stressed, which is good because Alberta spruce, when you buy them, are too densely foliated. So if they die off a little bit, you trim them a little bit scraggly, they look a lot more realistic. I've killed a number of them in the process. Has to have an office for the main company. That's the building you see there. One I picked up online, needs a little bit more work and some change on its lettering, but that's the main office of the Tall Timber Company. And it's also the switch right there leads you to the log dump. And there's the head frame to simulate the log dump. And the people that are operating here have to unload one car at a time right there. And then there's a tail track they can push down to. There's a little better view of it all together. Got the cars on the log dump, the locomotives on the first track. That water car, I think, is on the middle track. So you get a lot of railroad in this one little area to work. And that's the switcher, and I'll show you a picture of that a little bit later on. Twin Bridges is the next area. As you come out of Gregory, there's twin bridges to another reversing loop. Again, I wanted to have a little bit of a bridge idea and a little bit of trestle idea. I had some parts that were available, mostly that I got from people giving them away, and so I built that. This is the one that lifts out and provides access into Gregory. There's no crossover here, so you got to pay attention to which way you're going or you end up in the wrong place. There's Camp 2. That was the end of the original layout. You can see one side of that bridge brings you around the back. The other side of Twin Bridges brings you around the front. And then here is the logging camp and the log loader there, so you can load log cars. You'll see a lot of this stuff is pretty well elevated, and you have to be very careful. All my cars have Talgo style trucks and couplers, so you got to be careful when you're pushing around corners. And not too many things have fallen off. Here's a close-up view. I had some nice blowdown from my trees, found some nice straight pieces, and put together this to simulate a log loader there. Starting to add some more plants that can grow with very little soil. And these are chunks of other blowdowns that I had. And I cut them partway with my little hand chainsaw and then smacked them with a mallet, and they broke off just like a real stump. Drop them in the ground here, put just a little bit of some cement around them to fill in the ballast a little bit, and all of a sudden I've got two nice stumps to kind of simulate the logging idea. This tree is pretty much dead now, but it was a pear tree, and we call it pear tree crossing or pear tree siding. This is a little tree snag that I found while I was on a bike ride. Like, I got to stop and take that home. Always got to be looking for what might work in your railroad. In 2022, the back fence, about 100 feet of back fence was replaced. And I was anticipating that, so I was able to hang track on the fence to reach clear to the other end of my backyard. And you can see that happen. So here's the original loop we were just talking about that goes to Camp 2. I added this bridge across to the fence, and that is now called Pear Tree Bridge. And this track right here takes off for about 75 feet down to the other end of the yard. This track runs into Camp 3, and this track, little leftover spot, was available for rock camp. Hence the name rock camp. I got 4 rock cars and 1 gondola type car there with rocks in it. I found some pumice stones that my dad had when I was cleaning out his house after he passed away in the shed. And I have pumice. So it makes a really nice light load there for carrying around. That looks like really large riprap. There's the rock camp and the Pear Tree Bridge. Tried to give as many names as I can. A lot of switch and bouncing and buckling going on here. So I built a 5-mile-per-hour sign that hangs up there to try to remind the operators not to go too fast there so we don't have to dive and catch locomotives that are falling. There's Camp 3. Camp 3 is not a return loop. It's a long siding with a passing siding right here in the middle. So on all the other camps, you go through a return loop to get around your train. On this one, you have to use the passing siding to get around your train. And you shove your loads down here, another mast to simulate some sort of a log load, and a place over here for house cars to go. And I've since added a couple buildings here. There's looking the other direction at Camp 3. That's the newest edition of track. You can see that that has not been all ballasted in yet. It's just sitting on the original gravel that I tamped into place. The fence run is 75 feet. It's on a slight grade uphill. It's really fun to watch the train wiggle its way along there because the pressure treated lumber continues to move. More so than the rocks that I pounded and thought was going to be where my settling problem would be. So from time to time, I have to shim on the pressure treated, but it's really fun to watch the train work its way along there. And it takes, a little bit of time to get to the other end of the yard, and you get to walk along with it. Oops, got that one out of order. Another picture of Camp 3. There I was talking about the different scales. This little box car right here is sold as a G-scale box car with G-scale wheels underneath it that are much smaller. I'm not even sure what scale it is. So it didn't make for a very good piece of rolling stock, but it makes a great shed. So I've got a couple of those. Plus I needed the ladders off of it for another project. So the ladders got stripped off of it, and I got 2 sheds for my logging world. Put it on some skids. Pictures that I saw. These are just pieces of cedar that will hold up for as long as I'm going to need them to hold up. And they get a shed. All right, so we're going to continue along the fence there. You're about 7 or 8 feet away from the train here when it's running. The sound of these locomotives all have sound. They're battery powered. They make a nice sound off the fence there. And very good time. We approach railroad camp. That's the next place. You see, I have to come away from the fence and come to one of these areas where I built another return loop. I have to admit that I only got this one about half full of gravel, and then I needed more gravel, and the people that delivered it put the gravel in for me. So that was really nice. I didn't have to do all of that. So the front half is gravel. I'm having a terrible time with my cursor today. The front half is gravel. It goes around the back. It's elevated. There's a great big flower planter right here. So I've got some place to put some plants, and then it circles on around, comes to here. And this is quite the switching puzzle because most of us aren't used to using a balloon track as a reversing loop or to run around your train. But if your train's heading to the right, as you come in here, and you go all the way around, you come back and your train's heading to the left. And now you could do the switching that you needed to do there. So it works really effectively. There you can see it. This train's pulling in. They're going to have to do a little work on this siding right here. So they're going to have to deal with that siding. Then they'll run around the back, and then they'll deal with the empty log cars here for the loaded log cars. Log loading there. You can see the plants in that big flower pot behind, so I don't have to give up any of my track area for plants. When I put this along the fence, I spanned the 8-foot between fence posts plus or minus with 2x4s, and I had this one coming off the center, so I had to have extra 2x4 on each end, so why not add more track to it? And that's how Camp 4 became this. It started out as only a staging area, but in the last couple operating sessions I ran this summer, we've now started to do work down here. So the operator gets to go down some stairs here, and you can see that in a minute. It's been a very interesting knowledge curve. You think you know how to build a model railroad. And in a lot of ways I did. I'd been an indoor railroader for a long time. But I also found out there's a whole bunch of things I needed to learn. So along the way, I started with a bit of knowledge. I started to understand it when I tried to apply it. And then I found out some of it didn't work outdoors. And so then you reanalyze and you start all over again. But eventually, you work your way. So I'm up in here somewhere now, maybe in the analysis stage. Had 10 operating sessions on the railroad last summer. A really good time, but there's still some things to go. One of the things I found out is handrails matter. Not such a big deal inside because we're walking on the level, but this is 2.5 steps down to here to work that area. So I added a handrail. This is about 3 steps down here, and you got to step over the wall. So adding a handrail in these places is a big deal. I mean, you could reach out and grab the track. I'd rather you reach out and grab the handrail. And just little things like that, places to sit on the patio, things that are just a little bit different than on the inside. And I think probably the biggest surprise to me is how much the wood has moved compared to the packed gravel. Come to find out, a lot of other outdoor railroaders have noted that problem too. I just didn't know it yet. So let's switch over to operations in the shade. I've got to have paperwork. So this is a copy of some paperwork. What you see is 2 things. I don't have a lot of car numbers on yet, so some of the cars are just by type. So there's a tool car to be picked up at Gregory and taken out to railroad camp house track. So pretty straightforward paperwork. You follow it that way. Up here on top, it says run extra, Gregory to rock camp, to railroad camp, back to Gregory, down to Skookumchuck, and return to Gregory. So that gives you what my mind says is, here's how I want you to run this train. Here's the places I want you to stop. And if you do that, you'll see that all of your pickups and setouts follow along that way. So not real hard to follow paperwork. There's no real dispatcher here because there's only one mainline train. So that kind of eliminates the need for that. You just have to work your way from place to place. So here's working the mill at Gregory. I was able to get a second locomotive running this year. That's this little switcher here. So I have 2 two-person crews. The switcher crew works Gregory, which is all of this area right here. They take all the log cars, they distribute the log cars to the log dump. They pull any freight out of the mill that's been ready to go, and they put it onto the mainline train when it comes by. So that's what these guys are doing. They're working, happens to be the mill. You can also see that the attire for outdoor railroading is different. Shorts, hats, sunscreen, whatever is the appropriate. We are fortunate to have some pretty nice weather almost every day we operate. Here's switching the Skookum loop before the rhododendron got put in there. So if you're going to work these 2 sidings here, you're going to be setting your mainline train out here on a very tight curve, so you got to be thinking. You can't be pushing 4 cars very well back around this loop, so you got to think ahead on how you're going to do that. Here's another example of a car that was a little bit under scale. So I added a strip of styrene on the bottom here and turned it into an office. So, you know, there's ways to get around that kind of stuff to make it work. Got 2 box cars sitting here waiting to go, a really long flat car, a heavy, extra heavyweight flat car that'll have 4 sets of trucks under it instead of just 2. And you'll see this tank car in a little bit. So there's working. KD couplers, that would be the KD coupler pick right there. The same as you would use indoors, except a little bit longer. Here's the brain trust with 2 trains at Gregory. So the mainline train comes in loaded with logs. And the idea here is to hand that off to the switcher crew, and the switcher crew to hand empties back off to the mainline crew and get them out of town. And that should all go really smoothly unless you have 4 engineers. When you have 4 engineers, it goes a little bit more slowly. And 4 conductors is even worse. So the ideal situation is have the conductors talking to each other from each train and the engineers listening, but it didn't always work that way, which makes it for a lot of fun. So maybe this crew can do a little bit better job. This is another one of the sessions. People pointing, people talking, and mostly the trains were getting from where they were supposed to go. Here's working camp 3 on that runaround I talked about. The runarounds are long enough to get a 4 or 5 car train and run around the other end and then push them back into the sidings down here. And you get an idea how long that walk is, that 75 feet along the back of the house to the other end of the layout in the dappled sun. This was a very nice day. Railroad camp is a puzzle. It's also shaded. This isn't the best picture, but it does show them pondering what it is they're going to do and how to get this train. Here's the railroad camp loop. It starts here, goes around the back, and comes out here. So they've got their train halfway on the back of the loop, trying to figure out how to deal with the cars here that they're supposed to pick up. This may have been an oversight on my part to put the bird bath right here. I have to either take the water out of the bird bath or remind the operators not to put their paperwork in it. Otherwise, it gets really soggy really fast. But that's better than putting the throttle in it. So I will let them do that. Here's that trackage at railroad camp. Got my locomotive stuck in the middle, so how are we going to work that out? Well, there's plenty of actually places to work that out with that reversing loop in there. Again, this section, those are about a 4-inch block. So this is up about 12 inches, so you're not stooping down to the ground completely. Couple other places I have about 8 inches, and only over there at Rainier, that very first place, it will be within 4 inches of the ground, but you'll work it from the lower part of the yard, so I don't think that will be too much of an issue. The work train needs to get back into camp 4, or into railroad camp 4 here, logging camp 4, so they're working on that. This was before I had the handrail in there, so I wasn't asking people to go down there. Now that the handrail's in, you can walk down the steps here, manage this switch back up into here and stash your train. It's also a really good place to start the train out at the beginning of the session. Now we're highballing back to the log dump. Because it's a climax, I don't care if it runs forward or reverse, so part of the time you'll see it running in each direction. I've tried to figure out how to make it run forward more often by which way I started at the beginning of the session, and I haven't managed that yet because every crew runs it a little bit different. So, the blue car, you may be wondering, that's the battery and receiver for the radio system. There's a speaker in the locomotive in the tender piece here and the tank piece. And otherwise, this is a stock Bachmann climax. The joy of outdoor trains. There's a nice 80-degree afternoon in the shade. We had a nice 99-degree afternoon in the shade with some guys from Portland, and it was warm. Some might even say it was hot. But even in the worst of the weather, it's been very nice out there, especially if you get a dry summer. If it's just a little sprinkly, these trees are thick enough to hold most of the rain out, make it pretty comfortable. What's not shown is the cooler right there of soft drinks with ice, and these guys must have eaten all the cookies because I don't see any of the cookies, but makes for a very nice afternoon to sit out there and run some trains, even when it's pretty warm. From the back covered patio, we were talking about this earlier before we started. If you're done with your work as the switch crew, you can always come down to the back patio and pull up a chair and watch the other crew try to figure out railroad camp. And you can kibitz and help them as they do that. Yes, and put your feet up and sit in the shade. So that makes outdoor railroading very fun. There's another view of the backyard, so proof that I do have some garden for my garden railway. And every outdoor railroad I've seen has a water feature. I haven't figured out how to put a big one in place yet, but I've got this on the back patio. So you get the water sound as you're walking by, and you get the railroad sound as you're walking by, and sometimes you get dive bombed by the birds into the bird feeder. So it makes for a nice afternoon. The tall cedar timber railroad is dormant for the winter. You can see how many leaves are on it. I had twice that many leaves everywhere else. I eventually got those picked up. I decided just to let the leaves sit there until I had time to take them off carefully just once, because I don't want to damage anything that's underneath. Again, a lot of this is plastic track. It's holding up just fine. Some of it is elevated on these sections, so the leaf problem isn't as much, but everywhere I have the flower bed idea going, there's a lot of leaves in place that need to be removed. There's always more to do. I got to finish the switcher. This is the switcher that works there at Gregory. I happened across this picture. It's like, that is the perfect locomotive for me to build. This was a picture from Alaska. The Yakutat and Southern supposedly had this. It was a 042. It looks like they grafted a boxcar onto the back and extended the roof across the top. Like, I can do that. So I got the switcher. It was a 242. Got a boxcar, whacked parts of it away, and decided that rather than finish all the superstructure last year, I wanted to get this thing out and run it. So it ran for the whole summer looking like this, and it's about to go into the shops now to finish this detail across here, get it painted up, get rid of some of the red there, and see if I can't make this work. If you notice on my picture here, I didn't want to build an exact scale replica, but I put orange lines on here that are about 5.5 to 6 foot tall. And by doing that, I was able to work out my wheelbase and how high different parts of this thing should be. And that's how I scaled from one picture into the model that I've got here. I'm a little bit less deep on the back here just because I wanted it to manage my tight curves well, but otherwise fairly close to the configuration that this thing really had. Weathering, paint, and letter on everything, yeah, I've still got a lot of that to do to get this thing looking right. And then I'm still struggling with this thought about how to be comfortable between the amount of scale, detail, and outdoor survivability and operations. So indoor, I have a highly detailed, fine scale 1/32 railroad that operates nicely. So I figured out the fine scale detail and the operations balance there. But when you add outdoor survivability, it's a little different. So I'm still working to figure out exactly where that is at. And I think that's probably something that will go on for a while. Bridge to the new reversing loop at Rainier. That one's already pretty much on the drawing board. I know how it's going to go. I have all the track. I want to widen and re-level and reinforce the ledge along the fence. The locomotive did come off that ledge once. That was a very sad day, and I'd like to not have it do that again. So I'll add a little bit of width to that and some additional curve boards on the outside of my elevated curve sections to hopefully catch the locomotive long enough for me to go scrambling across and catch it. And more plants, especially since some of them die. And that is the end for now. Hopefully my railroad that used to look like that will never look like that again. And I think that is it.
Right on.
So let me get this back into a different view here. And we'll open that up for questions. Anybody that's still awake, questions? Yes,
How tall are
Kieran.
the figures?
Let's see. Go ahead with the one on Zoom. Who is that?
How tall are the figures?
So figures are about 3 inches, 3 1/4 inches tall to get a 5 to 6 foot person. And
Okay.
just like indoors, you can mess around a little bit with that and put larger scales towards the front, larger figures towards the front, smaller figures towards the back, and that will help if you've got some figures that aren't quite the right size. Just don't put them side by side. Although, if we were to all stand up here in this room, we'd notice some large scale figures and some smaller scale figures and some wide scale figures. So it's pretty good as long as the heads aren't too grossly different. You can get away with different scale figures. And there's a bunch of them available from Bachman, Prizer. Some of the LGB figures are available. And I'm always looking in the toy stores and any place else where they might have figures. There, a question here.
Yeah, the handrails are obviously very important to the stability of the operators. How did you anchor them so they really do help the operators?
The question was about handrails, in case you couldn't hear it. So all my handrails are cemented in just like fence posts and then tied together. And they're not real high, so you have to pay attention to where they are and reach down there and grab them as you make your transit from one step to the other. Fortunately, there's not a lot of time spent on there, but I wanted to make it just a little bit more sturdy. The rest of the yard is, has its ups and downs, but it's nothing so severe that you can't do it. The other thing you probably didn't notice in that one picture of the outdoor, there was a table, and underneath that table is about a 2-foot drop, because that's where my garbage cans normally sit. So by putting that table there, it keeps people from walking off the 2-foot drop, which that would be a problem. Because when they hit the raised bed, I don't think the raised bed would move. I see shaking heads of people that have been there. Other questions?
Do you have any extra track for when it does go bad, or you break it cleaning leaves, or
I've got a few
freeze thaw,
pieces,
any kind
but I not enough that if I had a really quick problem that I probably would have to run up to Burien, probably is the closest place to get some extra track if I can't get it on eBay.
any go bad?
I haven't had any of it go bad. And I've not necessarily followed the same kind of process that a lot of the outdoor railroaders use of using the split jaws to hold all the rails together. I've epoxied. I glue my switches down to cinder blocks, the paving stones, flat ones, and let that hold the track in place and make track connections there. And I've had 1 or 2 of the epoxy joints fail, but it's a matter of just throwing some more epoxy on it and make sure you grind the flange clear. And then when you throw some rust colored paint on the side of it and a little bit of dirt fall from the sky, you can't tell the difference in the track, and you really, unless you're looking, can't tell the difference in the connection points.
No heat expansion.
I had one heat expansion problem the very first year where it raised, a piece of the plastic track raised up, and I released a couple of nails and it laid right back down, and it's never done it again. So hopefully it won't. Even though I'm using plastic, brass, and steel track intermixed freely, not having problems with it. Since it's not carrying power, I don't have to worry about the oxidation. And the steel track rusts really nicely. Gives it real appropriate patina. Anybody else? Yes.
Leaf removal.
Yep.
How do you actually do that?
So that's a good question. Leaf removal and all the stuff that falls in the spring. One of the things I did is after I ballasted in my track, and I used chicken grit to do that because I knew it would be really easy to find it. I sprinkle a little bit of cement over a little concrete dust or cement powder,
Mhm.
and then I spritz it with water, and the rain spritzes it. And what I'm trying to create is a crust. So just the opposite of what you would do on your indoor railroad. You don't want a crusty ballast on the indoor.
Sure.
Outdoor, you let that crust sit there, and what that does is it holds it down, so I can use a battery-powered leaf blower and blow
Okay.
the track off without blowing too much of the ballast away. The other thing I have is a bottle brush with a motor on it that spins on the front of a maintenance car. You turn that on and run it around, and what it does is it throws stuff out forward away from the track. So that does a pretty good job of cleaning the track.
What do you gotta do for prep for operation? You gotta run the cleaner thing, make sure there's no spider webs or squirrels in the hiding around or something.
We don't talk about squirrels. I usually run the track cleaner on the front, that brush. I mean, if there's huge stuff on, I'll pick it off by hand. But I usually run the track cleaner around the whole layout. That way I get to see if there's anything broken. And at the same time, I pull cars from the storage shed out to the different locations. That's how I stage. It takes me about an hour and a half to fully stage the railroad. When I'm not running it, I take all the rolling stock off the railroad. I park as much as I can in the shed. The rest goes into plastic bins that live in the shed, and all the buildings come off too. And I don't have a whole lot of buildings. That not really what I want to do is I don't really want to have a lot of buildings, just enough to give the idea of what's going on in the railroad. So I think I'm up to about 5 or 6 buildings is all, and I don't expect to have many more. Yep, hour and a half, about an hour to put it away. Usually the operators are still there. I'll let somebody run a sweeper train, and we'll see how many cars we can pull downhill, and haven't found out what the limit is yet. More likely it'll stringline the curve than not be able to pull. And that gets all my equipment back down to the shed and put it away. I've got batteries that I've yet to run out. I don't know how many hours one of these batteries will run. I don't think I'll find that out in normal operations. I've run more than 4 hours on a battery before and haven't seen it go dead yet.
So Greg, unless I missed it, how are you doing your operations? You doing car cards, waybills? You doing switch list, or just
So-
mother may I?
Now that document that I had up is your train order and your switch list combined.
Okay, I
So
must have missed that. Okay.
It says run extra from Gregory out to Camp 3 and return. And then on the switch list part of it says 4 empty log cars, pick up any loaded log cars at Camp 3 and return them to Gregory for unloading at the mill,
Okay.
at the log pond. And then I also have them go past Gregory and go down around one of the loops so they come back facing the right direction to try to clean up some of that confusion on how to deal with those loops. And was able to put in a yard limit sign and have them come up to yard limits, and then the 2 different crews start working together.
Okay, thanks. Another question, weathering and detailing, you found it easier or more difficult in this larger scale?
I don't have an answer for that yet. The locomotive that you can see in my picture there, I used some weathering stain I had. I think it's called Dr. Ben's, and it's got color floating in an alcohol base. And I just basically slopped a lot of it on, and that gave me the weathering on the locomotive. On the freight cars, I'm using some stuff called mineral paint that I found in the craft world. It's a water-based craft paint, very dead flat colors. And I put that on with a brush and then scrub it in with a toothbrush. And that's how I'm doing the weathering. And what that does is it just kills the shine. And then whatever weathering it picks up is probably going to be okay, except for bird droppings. Bird droppings do not scale well. Those have to get cleaned.
So big a bird.
Well, that's true. The bigger, the harder it is.
Pterodactyl. Goal.
Thank you.
You bet. Anybody else? Yep.
Greg,
Where you at with
yeah,
live log loader?
what kind of batteries are you using on your railroad in the engines?
Lithium hydroxide, is that the right term? I think that's right. They're a very good battery in a small package. The battery pack in the locomotive is about as, if you hold out your hand and look at your fingers, that's about how big the battery pack is. And it's like 4 to 6 of those, about your size of your finger. And then within the package, there's a little bit of circuitry to control how it charges. I charge them up and they hold for a good long time. And that's what I'm running off of. The remote control system I'm using will take anything from 12 to 21 volts. I'm using 18-volt batteries because that's what the supplier had at the time. They all work just as well. And a number of the outdoor railroaders are using that same setup or similar setups to that. I heard your question.
Different question.
Okay.
Is there a crossover between model railroad batteries and controls and RC cars or airplanes or any kind of stuff, or is it all pretty proprietary or just different applications?
It's the same technology with a different application. I think probably the airplane guys that are running batteries probably want a lighter battery that can put out its power quicker, where the train guys probably are okay with a heavier battery that has longer duration. One of the locomotives I have, my rail car, has what looks to be some sort of a more like a model airplane radio set in it. There are plenty of articles on how to move back and forth between the two.
I just wonder about sources locally. I mean, we have a couple RC stores around here versus, no, you got to mail order them.
Yeah, they may have the batteries. I haven't checked there because I was, especially on the first one, I was working with a supplier that was recommended to me and bought the whole package from them, so that when I couldn't figure out how to do it, I could call them up and get some hints, and that's been real helpful. All right. Well, that could bring us to the end of our clinic then, and the end of the clinics, Olympia clinics for 2023.
Yeah.
Hopefully some of you will be able to join us when we get together in January for our prototype information on how to run a railroad, and have a good time with that. We'll have a good meal at Panorama, and hopefully some good discussion that we can carry on for future use in our model railroads, whether they be indoor or outdoor. I see Bob talking, but nope, okay. Then if that's it, everybody. Yes.
Yeah, one thing, Greg, I was late getting the recording from last month for Ron Hopkins. It is published and it is out on the 4D website now, or the 4D movie now.
Okay, very good. Yeah, all of our clinics end up on the 4D website. 4D website, you go there and to the YouTube channel. Great opportunity to see all sorts of clinics from all over the country, really, and you can look these things up. So thank you for
the last session of Off the Beaten Track. All of those presentations are going to be on the YouTube channel tomorrow.
Oh, okay. So Tuesday of this week was the narrow gauge group called Off the Beaten Track, and those literally are coming from all over the country, if not foreign countries. And in those, you get a layout tour, you get some information on projects, and usually some prototype information, and a good briefing about the upcoming narrow gauge convention. So those are a really good one. If you don't know about that one and you're interested, send an email to me or to Russ, and we can help you get connected to that too.
Well, yeah, I should elaborate.
So let's get on to the tall